Now, I don't work in an office, I work in the ocean. It is the oldest, largest, and least changed physical feature on the planet. The ocean where I work, of course, has brutal physics. If you're 2 miles down, as we will be in a few minutes on the Titanic, and you make one mistake in judgment or in motion, you not only lose the money of the expedition, your professional career, but you could lose your life.
Dr. Joe MacInnis. Communication, courage, teamwork, in depth. Dr. Joe MacInnis, internationally acclaimed deep-sea explorer, the first person to dive under the North Pole, inventor of the world's first Arctic undersea station, among the first to dive to the Titanic, leader of more than 50 undersea expeditions, medical doctor, scientist, filmmaker, visionary. Dr. Joe MacInnis, in depth, using compelling examples and dramatic video clips to recreate undersea challenges, tailoring his insights to the challenges of the workplace and the theme of your meeting. One thing that is crucial 3 miles below the sea, communication in depth.
Let me give you an example. When I first dove the Titanic, I'd never been this deep to a shipwreck before. And you dive 2.5 miles down, the hatch closes, you're in this small space of about 6 feet with 3 people and all kinds of life support and all this. It's a very busy time. And as we're making this descent and gravity pulls you down, you're not tethered at all. You turn down the lights because you want your power for the bottom. You turn the lights off inside, basically, so little red lights, and you let gravity pull you down for about 3 hours until you get to the wreckage in 2.5 miles. And so I'm in there, and we're making this descent. And I'm with this small French pilot, Pierre-Yves, and the co-pilot, Jean-Michel. And we're going down, and we get down to about 6,000 feet, and I begin to think, gee whiz, we're going to 12,000 feet. Let's see. When we get to the bottom, it's going to be 6,000 pounds per square inch. If there's a pinhole leak anywhere through all these through-hull fittings, 3 guys inside here are going to turn into pink hash. This is all going through my mind when Pierre-Yves, we get to the bottom, and Pierre-Yves parks the submarine. And this is a bit of a surprise to me. I don't know what's going on. So he looks at his watch, and gets up, and he opens up a small compartment behind where we're sitting and brings out a plastic container. Opens it up, and inside are 3 open-faced sandwiches and a small bottle of Beaujolais. He looks at his watch, he looks at me, and he says, "Monsieur, I notice that you are a bit nervous, so I think it is time for the picnic." I couldn't believe it. So we sit in the submarine, and for the next 30 minutes, we didn't drink all the Beaujolais, but we had the sandwiches, and we started talking, and I forgot where I was completely. Talked about French politics and literature, and suddenly I realized what was really happening. They hadn't just given me lunch. They were giving me confidence.
Adapting to today's uncertainties, rising to tomorrow's challenges, confidence, commitment. Dr. Joe MacInnis. Courage in depth.
I have a friend in Moscow. His name is Anatoly Sigalovich. Anatoly is an engineer. He is also the head of manned diving for the P.P. Shirshov Institute in Moscow. He is the guy who directs the Russian deep diving program. He is responsible for 2 $25 million submarines, and these submarines can dive to 20,000 feet. A top secret nuclear submarine, the Komsomolets, a one-of-a-kind vessel that cost $1 billion to build. It was as long as a football field, 3 stories high, a crew of 69 men, all focusing on the most advanced weapon systems in the Russian undersea navy. The Komsomolets was crossing the Norwegian Sea at a depth of about 400 feet when a fire broke out, and a few hours later they had to abandon ship. This huge vessel sank, went to the bottom in about a mile of water, and Anatoly Sigalovich, my friend, was ordered by the Russian military to take his 2 advanced deep diving submarines and inspect the wreckage. The loss of this submarine was to the Russians at that time equivalent to the loss of the Challenger spacecraft. And that really was the last we heard of it until a few months later. I was at a meeting in Moscow, and a group of us, about 40 of us, were in a room about half the size of this room, and we were talking about our plans to work together using the Russian deep diving technologies and the American and Canadian imaging technologies to explore the sea. And around the perimeter of the room were about 10 of these guys with the very short necks and the wide shoulders and the bodies by Caterpillar, and bulges in the coat pocket. These, of course, were the KGB. They didn't like the fact that we were having this discussion at all. We were talking about what we would do together, and eventually we went off to make an IMAX film on the Titanic, and in turn to inspire Jim Cameron's film. But that evening we were talking about what we wanted to do when Anatoly, at the end of the evening, came up to me and said, "Look, I've got a favor. My Russian colleagues and I have inspected the Komsomolets, and she's leaking radioactivity from the nuclear reactor and from the two nuclear-tipped torpedoes. I have a small videotape that I would like to give to you, and I'd like you to take the videotape out of this country into your country and tell our story. It's very important that this get out." Well, I have a PhD in fear. And I'm looking at this guy, and I'm looking at these guys all around the room, and I realize what I'm really looking at is the face of courage. Here is a guy that is willing to put it all on the line: his career, his reputation, his family, his life, perhaps. The story was picked up by, because no one had seen any nuclear submarine on the ocean floor before, it was picked up by CNN and ABC and NBC and flashed around the world. And what had happened was Anatoly had opened a small window into a very large story, and the story was that during the Cold War, the opponents on either side had used the ocean as a nuclear dumping ground. Anatoly, he went through a real difficult period of time. Interrogation, harassment, threats, and finally emerged safe on the other side because he was our friend. He became a hero in Russia. I was talking to him afterwards, and I said, "Anatoly, how did you get through it? I mean, what did it take?" And he said, "Look, it's very simple. I knew that they could take away my career, and they could take away my country, but I knew they couldn't take away my convictions."
Dr. Joe MacInnis, co-leader of the most daring deep diving project ever conducted, a $7 million expedition to the Titanic. The expedition that inspired the Hollywood film. Inspiring leadership, as vital in the boardroom as under the ocean. Teamwork, in depth.
So what I'd like to do is take you into my world for a few minutes. I want to talk about leadership deep inside the ocean. I'd like particularly to focus on a 4-year period when we struggled to put together the team, to put together a budget of $7 million and go out with $200 million of diving technology 2.5 miles into the Atlantic Ocean and study and film the Titanic for a giant screen IMAX film and for a CBS television special. The dream I had just hit a brick wall right away because there was no money. There was no interest at this time. It was impossible to go 2.5 miles down to the Titanic and spend enough time there with big cameras and lights and do this thing. And we were struggling with the idea that we could create a partnership between North Americans and Russians, because they had the deep diving submarines, two $25 million brand new deep diving submarines. I mean, the ultimate fat boy. And by the way, this was a struggle, a real struggle, because we didn't speak the same language with the Russians. We didn't have the same ideologies. We certainly didn't have the same safety standards. And I heard one wonderful presentation on quality. Quality in my business and in yours is when your life depends on it. So we decided, okay, enough of the meetings in Moscow, enough of the, this is all over, by the way, a table like the one you're sitting at with a lot of vodka on it. So let's commit ourselves, okay? Let's just hit the road here and stop fooling